Welcome to Nurse Practitioners Changing Practice. Today we are honored to have Dr. Gail Pittroff with us, and we have just an exciting topic, but it's one that it's APA, and I know you're just all excited to hear about that, but it's a stumbling block. And Dr. Pittroff, you are an expert in this. You have counseled many students through the doctoral process. And I know a lot of students get hung up on even entering the doctoral studies because they don't think they can write that way. They're not sure if they understand APA, and that becomes a stumbling block for them. What's been your experience? What can you tell us? And then you're going to talk to us a little bit about this tool you developed to help students.
Yeah, Carol, well, thanks for having me and inviting me to share some of this information. I really, I struggled through APA myself, and I was in my doctoral program. My own children had said, why are you struggling so hard? And why are you fumbling through this book? Why don't you just get APA Perla? And that's a good resource because it formats your paper for you. And I'm going to share that APA Perla website that you can find that on. But I was already halfway through my doctorate. And one thing about Perla is you can't take a paper that's already written and then go back and put it into the software. You have to start the paper in the software program itself. It's $100.
Yeah, you were halfway through it. So
I was halfway through. I had like 3 chapters written already. And so I just
tell
never
me a little bit about Perla though. How does it, is it really helpful?
Yeah, I mean, the people that use it swear by it, and the students that use it, they turn their papers in that have been Perla papers. It's all correct. So it also keeps it, you put things in, obviously it needs to know your citations, but it creates the reference page for you correctly. It'll prompt you like, what type of source is this, so that you get it right. Like if it's a chapter in a book, a journal, a website. So it works with you to get everything done right. It also keeps all those references and bibliographies stored so that you never lose that in a separate compartment other than your paper. When I started out learning about it, it was $50, but I think it's up to $100. But the nice part about it is you don't have to repurchase it when they come up with a new edition like you do a new textbook. You automatically get the new edition uploaded to you. Yeah.
How about your insight text, when you need to do insight in text citations? How do you do that with Perla that makes it easy?
Well, I mean, when you let them know it's time to cite, you just, you follow the prompts.
And then it puts it in there for you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, I mean, it's interactive a little bit. It's kind of, it doesn't read your mind. You have to work.
No, you have to tell it, right? But it can put the text in the right place, the right way.
Right.
And I know that there's been changes now with APA 7 that were different, especially with our in-text citations and things like that. So it upgrades it and knows that it's changed. So tell us about this tool you came up with, these top 10 mistakes.
Well, prior to, like I said, the software being available, and even afterwards, after I taught myself much of APA, and I had some instructors who gave me really good feedback, I had some who didn't. So I decided that I realized, and when I started teaching, I realized that students were making the same mistakes over and over again. And I just found, you remember David Letterman? He had a show when he did the top 10 topic at every night. And I just thought, well, this would be sort of a simple way to capture the top 10 areas that students, if they look into the book, well, not just that they struggle with, they just don't realize when they get that manual, it's daunting. They think that they're so used to reading a book. Well, that's not a book you read. That's a book that you flip back and forth in and you put tabs in. And so after grading a few papers along the way, because I taught a lot of writing intensive courses, I just developed this tool and I basically put it out there and said, if you follow these top 10 areas where students make mistakes, you won't be able to turn in a paper that is not done well. I mean, there always might be some other, minute piece to the paper that's not done correctly, but by and large, these are the top 10 areas that students need to look at, use the tool to edit their paper, use the tool to find those pages where they need to go, those go-to pages, those key go-to pages that produce a decent APA paper product. So that's why I created it, and I can pull it up and share it with you.
Share that with us so we can look at this. You've published this, I understand.
Yeah, it's been published in a journal in 6th edition. Now I need to go ahead and try to go back and see if I can't get them to let me do a 7th edition version, which the tool I'm sharing with hosts, I don't have, it says that you disabled my sharing.
Oh, okay. Here, let me try it again.
Okay. And here we go. Okay, so I went ahead and when we got 7th edition, I re-edited it for the new pages. The other thing too is this is based on the manual because there is an ebook that some of these pages are a little off, but it's not that hard to find in the ebook. But it's not exact, they're not precise as they are. It's not as precise as the manual is.
So for those of you listening, what Dr. Pittroff has up is her top 10 list. And, we're going through the different error codes or the things and where you would find them in the APA.
Right. And the reason I put error codes is when I grade the first paper that I'm, expecting, that I'm giving feedback on, I do write out a narrative where they went wrong. But then I have found that students don't pay attention to what I wrote. And so in subsequent papers, I'll just code their paper with, okay, you made this number 1 error. I've already talked about it in a previous paper, and I'm not going to rewrite all that narrative out. So it's also a nice grading tool because you don't have to constantly say the same thing over and over again to people that are not paying attention to your feedback. You can just code.
Right, that would be invaluable for instructors.
Yeah, so this is really more for the instructor, the code error. But here's the error that students make. They don't do a correct title page. Running heads have changed in graduate school, like at our university. It says in the manual that there's no running head needed anymore unless it's a manuscript that you're trying to get published. Now, our own school said we wanted our graduate students to use running head because hopefully we'll want them to get ready for that. So you want to check with your school because everybody's got a new interpretation on that. But for most people, a running head is not needed for a student paper. But running head is left off, and now that's okay. Page numbers are not in the right place. Fonts, APA, it used to be 12 Times New Roman, but they actually increased their choices of fonts that you can use, and where you can find all of those things are in these pages right here.
Perfect.
So this is the common error, and then this is the page number. You can find it. And here I was talking about the APA.
That's that's your Perla.com.
Yeah, that's where you can find that resource if you don't even want to mess with this and you just want to use that software. Then this website is just the APA has also put out their own website and given quite a lot of information free. So you can click on this to see samples. This website takes you to different topics and page numbers where you can find things. But so I put both of these on here because I think they're good resources for people to look at.
I think if people can sometimes just see an example of what they're trying to do, then they can duplicate that.
Right. And here, like 50 to 67, that's where all the sample papers are in the manual. So, but, that's if you've got the book in your hand. This might, you'd be able to find that on the website as well. So then the other thing is an abstract, which how to do an abstract or on these pages. A lot of times it's missing. or it's not put on a separate page. Abstracts are always supposed to be on separate pages.
Do they always need an abstract?
Not always. So that's an instructor, choice. So, but like I do doctoral courses, so we do use abstract.
Yeah.
But, the master's level courses, if it's a reflection paper, abstracts are really needed for larger bodies of works, like research studies that have major pieces to them, such as purpose, aims, design, method,
right.
results, implications.
Yeah.
All of those different pieces. And then why people do abstracts is that they're published in, and then when you look them up in the library, you can get a glimpse.
Quick shot of what it was.
What that whole piece is about. And then, is this the kind of thing that I need to download, or can I use this work? Is this what I'm looking for? So abstracts are really quick and dirty guides to let the researcher know if this article is appropriate for their work.
Perfect.
But so you may not need an abstract in all your papers, but if you do, this is where you find information on how to create one. Heading use is it just changed. 7th edition changed.
The different levels of heading that
right.
seems to be, confusing.
A lot of students still put introduction on their paper, and introduction is never used in an APA paper. The first heading in the paper is typically the title in bold on page 1. And so this goes through that, and also inside the cover of your manual, if you just open the manual up on the inside cover, the levels of heading are right there. So, level 1 is center, level 2, flush left, level 3, flush left, italics, and so on and so on.
Right.
So that's where that's at. Another problem I see is acronym use. Nurses are so used to acronyms. We use them all the time, every day. You have to spell them out first time in text. You have to put them in parentheses, and then you can use it subsequently throughout the paper. Punctuation is an issue, especially with et al. It's the period goes after the all, and you only need a comma after the period if it's in parentheses. If it's just in the text, you just need the period, then the date. So these pages that talk about these particular problems are noted over here. Citations, we get into all kinds of fun problems with that. One of the things that I find is people don't understand the difference between paraphrasing and direct quoting. If they direct quote, or they'll say, Chin and Kramer stated, which implies a quote, and then they don't have quotation marks or a page number. So if it really wasn't a statement, you shouldn't say that they stated. You should just paraphrase. They discussed, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
And
we
talk
want
about
more.
it.
We want more paraphrased, right?
Right. We want to move away from direct quotes. It's sort of an elementary research skill when you just borrow quotes. And a lot of people think that if they just get enough quotes, they can just weave them together and that's a paper. But that's actually considered still plagiarism because you don't have any of your own ideas.
Right.
The point of an APA paper, and the whole point of science in general, I like to tell students to think of themselves as little mini attorneys. And what they're really doing is they're pleading a case about a certain topic. And then they're using literature to support their case or their claim as evidence.
Right.
So if you can kind of think that I've got to plead my case and convince the reader that this is important and it's justified by all this different literature, but I still have to create my own narrative. I still have to talk about this in my own words. I have to get my own dialogue going with this. Your papers are much better and they're more synthesis in nature. And synthesis is when we're able to take information and come up with new information. So your thoughts on it, your ideas on it, add to the conversation about the topic that you're presenting.
So I always read all the different papers first and kind of get my head wrapped around what they're all trying to say, and then summarize what I've read. And that, and then you can use those papers as your citing. You cite them because that's where you got the information from. But
yeah, and that's
a lot of the students, they'll take it directly from that source and feel like they have to write it like they're piecemealing these different articles together.
Right. They kind of go in and they just pluck things out and then plunk it
Right.
in their paper instead of like really reading it holistically. And sometimes that's difficult because if it's a big, long research article, it's difficult to read a research article holistically.
Well, and
But
I get a lot of them where they'll say sometimes a study was done. And then they don't say like who did the study, how many people were in the study, what kind of study was it? A study was done and it said that we should all drink, tea. It's just like something crazy, right? And it doesn't give you any really information. And that's one of my pet peeves is I'll go back and they'll say, you need to tell me, Barber's study in 2024 which was a retrospective, review of 500 people. So, give me the meat and potatoes of the study so that I know, was it 2 people in the study, 1,000 people? Was it a quality study? Was it just a survey? What are we talking about? So I can determine whether that was something I'd pay attention to or not.
right. And I think here's a real quick and dirty trick is look at the abstract. The abstract is
Right, the
usually
abstract has it, yeah.
the abstract says it like that.
Right,
So try to gear your writing to the way the abstract presents
right.
it, especially if you're speaking about research. And then, add your own input.
Right. But you can get those facts and that important little piece that you need to make it sound like this is what the type of study was, and you can get that right there from the abstract. And that's really a nice way to look at it.
Right. So all of these topics about citing are on these pages, but here's one of my biggest pet peeves, and this is redundant citing. I'll get a paragraph and I'll have a student that'll have the same source 6 times and with the date, every other sentence or something. I'm like, no, nobody writes like that. If you have a whole paragraph that's dedicated to ideas that you got from one source, you just start off and say, nursing theoretical development is discussed by Chin and Kramer 2010, and they provided information regarding blah 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 blah. They also included blah 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 blah. Chin and Kramer also additionally think, and you don't have to keep adding the date every time you bring them up. Sometimes if you just cue the reader that you're still on the same source,
right,
you don't have to redate it. So you don't want to, and people do this because they're afraid they're going to get dinged for plagiarism, but that's not really good writing.
Just trying to cue. Yeah.
And it's considered plagiarism if every other sentence is a citation. That again is showing that you're not in dialogue with this source. You're not really writing the way you're supposed to be. You're just plunking down information. So that's a pet peeve. Paraphrased work that's, you have to always ask yourself, what was I born knowing? Not much. So most of the things you pick up, somebody else is going to get credit for. But you can certainly write about it in a larger way without having to constantly cite it.
Right.
Direct quotations are often, they forget the quotation marks or the page numbers. And like I said, try to avoid those altogether. One of the things I learned while I was doing my own dissertation is I did a phenomenological study and I read a lot of thick philosophy on ontology, and it was not an easy read. And so instead of quoting this over and over, I really just sat down and pretended I was explaining this to like a family member. And then I would record myself on my phone. And then I would dictate what I recorded. And you cannot, unless you have a photographic memory, you cannot verbally say what it is you just read. You automatically paraphrase when you go to repeat it verbally.
You do.
So that's a little trick to help you learn to paraphrase a little bit easier. And then, of course, when you record it, you can't just dictate it verbatim because you're going to have to put the grammar correct. Because we talk different than we write, but you're going to have to make it grammatically correct. But I really found that is a very, very helpful way to paraphrase information that's not easy to explain. And then number 6, Sometimes people forget about secondary sources. They'll be reading a book that Chin and Kramer are writing about, but Chin and Kramer are discussing someone else. So, the way to do that is, you say Carper, 1978, as cited in Chin and Kramer. So to give that the origin of what they're talking about credit, they're using in their text, they're using a source that's been written about, and they're getting their information from someone else. So you just don't assume that that's all Chin and Kramer's work. You give,
and I've seen that a lot where, they're just citing the primary source.
Exactly. Websites, the page numbers for how to cite websites. A lot of the common errors are that URLs are left out of the citation. The retrieval dates may be missing. Now in 7th edition, they point out you don't need a retrieval date if it's material that's never going to change.
Okay.
But if it's going to update and those websites may in 2 years say something else, then you need to put your retrieval date down if it's information that could possibly change. Number 8, basic in-text citation styles and use of et al. Again, more citation, author page, date, something in the citation is missing, or et al is not done correctly. In 7th edition, 2 or more authors, you use et al. It used to be like 5 you name first, and then you use it, but that's no longer the case. It's 2 or more.
Really cut that down.
And it makes sense because
because you hate to keep reading all the author names. It takes away from the writing.
Yeah, and then even you don't need all 5 authors for the first one anymore, just the first 2. And then in your reference list, when you do, like, let's say you have a source that has 20 or more authors, you're supposed to list the first 19 and then use ellipses for anything more than that. So that's all on those pages listed there. Excuse me. References. Reference lists. A lot of times students put their library links on the reference list. If it's a formal paper, and like especially if the person who's reading it doesn't have access to your university library, we don't need your university link. Some people leave out, a lot of people put references on the reference list, but they never cite it in the in-text area.
Yeah, they have to be in both.
Yeah, it has to be in both places. So you need to double check. Do all your citations have a reference? Do all your references have a citation? And the way I do that is I use the find button in Word. It's up in the upper right-hand corner. You click on find, you type the first name of the author, and it'll show up. If you do the reference list, it'll show up on the reference list and then every place it showed up in the paper. Well, if you type it in from the reference list and it's not in text, and then you know that you missed it.
I do the old-fashioned way with check marks.
That works too.
I print my paper and I've got my references and I check, and then I check it on the paper.
Well, I actually do both. I do both because you still have to go back for all the citations to make sure they're referenced. So I write those out with a check mark, but I also use the find for the reference list itself. So I do both.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, when you're doing a doctoral paper, sometimes, when you do individual chapters and then you synthesize all of it together, you take out some parts. And so some of the things that you took out might have something on a reference list that you don't, that part you took out or something. So that's why I always double check and make sure that everything is where it needs to be. But I like your idea to use the find button. I think I might take that I'll start doing that. That might be easier.
Well, what's nice too is like when I'm grading papers, I can't do it in Canvas, but like if I had it on Word and I see that, like for one thing, acronyms, I can use the find button too to make sure that the acronyms were at least spelled out the first time, and then they show up every other time without being spelled out.
Now you're saying as long as they were spelled out the first time anywhere in that paper, then the rest of the paper they can use the acronym.
Right.
It's not like the paragraph, it's the whole paper. Once they use it, you can keep on going. Now, I mean, I've had where I've done publishing, and sometimes we do spell it out again later on down the paper, just because to cue the reader as to what that was, because they might have forgotten. You don't want them going back to the beginning to try to figure out what did that mean. But I know it's not a rule. I mean, so
No,
sometimes
the rule is if you mention it once, you can just use the acronym throughout. And I know what you're saying, because there's times when I'm reading papers, I'm like, what was that acronym? Did she mention that? And I have to go back up and
yeah, I
find
mean,
it.
now, common ones, no, but sometimes there's
Right.
ones that you don't understand and you have to keep going back to figure out what it is they're talking about. And that's as you keep going down a long paper. So I can see why sometimes when you're publishing them, they have you respell it out at a certain point just to cue a person's memory. Oh yeah, that's what that means.
Well, and here's the fine point about publishing too. They hold the gold rules about all of it. So
Right.
even if you learned it a certain way and they want you to do it the way they want you to do it, you're going to have to do it their way. So that's just how it is to get something published. So that, I mean, even if you do it everything perfect in
Yeah,
APA and
they
they
could
still
still
want
tell you they
something done
want.
different, we have to just comply to get it out there. So these references, then I find sometimes they're missing a DOI, or another thing is people, like I said, with textbooks. These textbooks are edited books with multiple authors who often, write different chapters. So there's a way to give credit to the author of that chapter, and that's found on these pages. And it looks different than just a book reference. It's got a little bit more information. Like who the editor is, so and so and so and so, what the title of the chapter is in Chin and Kramer's 10th edition. It gives the reader an idea. Oh, this is somebody that wrote a book chapter within a textbook.
Right.
And then the last thing, it actually should be the first thing, but it's not the nitty gritty of APA. It's just general writing style and rules. You want topic sentences. You want to support it. You want to wrap them up. You want to have transition sentences that move you to the next paragraph and the next sections. When you're using headings, you just don't want to plunk these headings down and stop the conversation. Good writing would guide the reader that, okay, now it's time to turn to an understanding of the need for,
Well, the use of tense has changed now too. It used to be with APA, you could never use the word I. You always had to speak in third person. Am I wrong?
No, you're right. They actually, and I, as a qualitative phenomenological researcher, I always like the word I. It just didn't fit because I was not doing quantitative research with a, with worrying about subjective sway. I was always doing qualitative research, which is more like field research.
Right.
And the researcher themselves lends, actually, sometimes the inquiry is totally motivated by the expertise of the researcher to know what questions to ask. It's
Well,
just a whole different paradigm. It's a cultural, historical, phenomenology is not in the same paradigm. It's a naturalist paradigm versus that positivist paradigm, that traditional, empirical, randomized controlled trial.
Gail, I think I
sciences.
lost your I lost your I'm not hearing you.
Oh no.
There you are. There you are.
Okay.
Yeah,
Let me
yeah,
get closer.
like you kind of went away and I could see your mouth moving, but it could be
When
my
did-
connection.
you know what
So you were talking a little bit about the I and it being phenomenological research and all of that.
the I is like, it's okay now, especially in projects where you're not concerned about subjective sway of the researcher.
So you can say, in my clinic, I noticed there was a problem and I've decided, rather than saying the researcher.
Right.
Right.
They've gotten over that, thank God, because they needed to.
It always sounded a bit kind of odd,
Right. It was
I tend to
laboratory.
not say too much of, in a doctoral paper, we're not talking so much about our opinion. So there's not a lot of I in it.
No, there's not, but there are sections in
But there are sections that it would be very applicable because you are talking about the problem you found in your clinic and you're addressing. So,
and you're doing certain things to implement practice improvement. So those
right.
are personal initiatives.
Personal.
So it's okay to use I. So,
that's going to take some, I think a lot of instructors are going to have a hard time getting over that,
well,
right?
I tried, because there's an area in our first chapter where they have to talk about their interest and expertise. And
Uh-huh.
it just doesn't even sound right when they do it in third person. So I tried to get
Yeah.
that through before APA came out and said, gave it the blessing. And they were like, no, we don't want to do that. But now we do it.
I
Yay.
do it. Yeah.
So
Well, this tool is just a wonderful resource because it just tells you exactly what pages to go to. How could a student get a hold of this? Where did you publish this at?
well, this was published for the 6th edition in the Journal of Christian Nursing in 2014. It was called Training Nurses for Writing Habits. But so, I mean, you're welcome to post this with your website.
Oh, absolutely. And anybody that's listening on
I just share it.
podcast, yeah, make sure that you go to the YouTube channel to watch this because you'll see, you know, the document and all the pages and everything. And we will post the document with your permission on our website too.
Yeah, I just share it with other people. I put it in my courses. I would like to go ahead and try to get it published again, but I just haven't gotten around to that. I've had other things on my plate. So,
and I think Perla.com would be worth the investment. Now, don't have stock in it or anything like that, but you know, it's hard enough to write a paper without having to worry about the mechanics of it.
right. And here's the other point of that is, you know, it sounds like a big investment out of pocket first, but none of these books are cheap. And I started back to school. I finished a BSN, then a master's, then a PhD over the course of many years. So I think I started APA in the 4th edition and now we're to the 7th.
Yeah.
So
you don't have to pay for those editions.
right. I don't have to pay for a new book every time if I buy Perla.
Right.
So,
And then, I mean, find where the new page is with all of these things on it, because I'm sure with each edition, it's a little different.
it is that I had to go through. It took a lot of time just to find where these things were in the 7th edition, because they did quite a lot of revamping on that. It's much better. It was revamped quite a bit.
Well, Gail, you are a wealth of knowledge on APA. I know it was not your desire to study this. You just had to learn it because you had to plod through it, but you have developed something that should at least take off some of the anxiety that students have when they start writing, because at least they know where to go, what to look for, what the most, like you said, the most common errors are. And if they can get these things right, the other things shouldn't be that big of a deal.
There should be very few errors beyond what I showed here.
Yeah. I want to thank you for coming on and for sharing your knowledge and being patient with us, and just being willing to share what you have learned over all of these years with students who are struggling to get through a doctoral project.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you inviting me and getting the word out on this. So, you know, there's lots of resources and you just have to sit down and take the time. And if you go to the trouble to write an A paper and then you get dinged for APA and it takes you down to a 90, gosh, it's not necessary. Just spend 30 minutes, go through, make sure that you've hit the highlights on all these, and you'll keep that high scored paper.
Yeah, because you worked hard for it. And so for those of you listening, thank you for tuning in. Please check out our website. It is NPS Changing Practice, npschangingpractice.com. You will be able to get to our podcast there, as well as you can check it out on our YouTube channel, which is Nurse Practitioners Changing Practice as well. And we will post this APA top 10 list from Dr. Gail Pittroff. We thank you so much for joining us, Gail, and you have a great night, okay?
Thanks, Carol. You too.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Okay, this is where I went wrong before. If yes, you will receive. Are you sure? Yes.